The White House says President Donald Trump will decide within the next 2 weeks whether the US will join Israel in bombing Iranian nuclear sites. In a statement, Trump added that there was still a chance for talks to secure a deal over Iran's nuclear program. Europe's top diplomats are set to meet Iran's foreign minister in Geneva today. It's the first meeting between Tehran and Western governments since the conflict started 1 week ago. This comes as both Israel and Iran continue to trade intense fire. Israel says it will ramp up airstrikes on Iran after a hospital was hit by an Iranian missile.
One of Israel's busiest neighborhoods just east of Tel Aviv flooded with first responders after an Iranian missile struck the area, hitting this residential building and damaging several others. Authorities say dozens of people were injured.
We were very scared. There were lots of little children, there were lots of babies. We were all together and we didn't know what was going on. We didn't know what was going on in our own house.
It was like a whistle, and then I heard the crash, the boom. It was horrible. And the door of the mamad was open like a hurricane.
This was one of the latest waves of strikes in the conflict between Israel and Iran. Israel says it struck the so-called Khondab nuclear site near the city of Parrick in central Iran. These satellite images show the area before and after the Israeli attack. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has repeatedly said that the main goal of the offensive is to stop Iran's nuclear program. He also stresses that destabilizing Iran's regime is not the main objective.
Regime change is first and foremost up to the Iranian people. There is no shortcut to that. Therefore, I've not set it as an official or declared goal. It may be a result, but it's not an explicit objective.
Meanwhile, the White House has addressed the possibility of the US getting involved in the conflict. But at the same time, it says Tehran still has a chance to secure a deal over its nuclear program.
And the White House counsel, I have a message directly from the president, and I quote, "Based on the fact that there's a substantial chance of negotiations that may or may not take place with Iran in the near future, I will make my decision whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks."
So far, it's been a week of intense escalation, and it appears that neither Israel nor Iran is ready to back down.
I spoke to DW correspondent Emily Gordin in Tel Aviv earlier and asked her about the latest developments there.
Well, Israel this morning reported that it had downed that it intercepted several drones that were launched from Iran. This morning, a missile hit Beersheba, a city in Israel's south. 5 people were lightly wounded and they were taken to Soroka Hospital, which itself was hit yesterday by an Iranian missile, causing quite significant damage, but operations had previously been moved underground in anticipation of a possible strike. Now, the Israeli military commented on this morning's attack, saying that it is likely due to an interceptor failure. And it essentially said that, this incident goes to show that while Israel possesses really extensive air defense systems, it is not bulletproof. It is not 100% bulletproof, and some missiles do get through and do strike civilian infrastructure.
Emily, what's the atmosphere like there, given Donald Trump is now stalling his decision whether to get the US directly involved in striking Iran?
Israelis remain optimistic. They see Iran's nuclear program as an existential threat. And when push comes to shove, they are convinced that the US will protect them. Of course, it is known among Israelis that in order to reach some of the underground nuclear facilities in Iran, they require so-called bunker-busting bombs, and only Americans have them. Only American planes can fly them. So there is some awareness that what Israel can do here is limited. At the same time, there is some speculation that Israel could also launch some kind of ground operation if it does maintain significant control in a particular area. And in the meantime, what we're seeing is Israel essentially keeping up its strikes on Iran, with Yisrael Katz, the Israeli defense minister, saying that essentially threatening Iranian leader Ali Khamenei, which is an indication that it is not just about Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile program that Israel is going after, but also a regime change in Iran.
Emily Gordin in Tel Aviv. We'll leave it there. Thanks so much. For more, I'm joined now by DW correspondent Theresa Troper, who has reported from Iran many times. Theresa, Israel's military said it struck dozens of targets in Tehran overnight. What are you hearing from Iran?
Well, not very much at the moment, Anthony, I have to say. That's because communication has been cut now for almost 2 days. Ever since the Islamic Republic has imposed like a nationwide internet shutdown, saying the Israeli military was using the network for military purposes. Incoming calls are also restricted. So almost all people I've been in touch with are no longer able to connect to the internet and tell me how things are in Tehran at the moment. But more importantly, they're also not able to connect to the internet to find out how things are and what is happening, because they were able to access the latest news on social media or even the IDF evacuation orders previously. And now they can't do that anymore. So they have to make their decisions based on little to no knowledge what's going on. Some of them have already left Tehran and are hiding somewhere in the north or in villages around, hoping it will be over soon and then they can return to their houses. And others are still staying put in Tehran, hiding in their flats and wondering what to do, wondering if they should leave or if they can leave, because we know the Israeli operation is still very much ongoing and no one really knows what the next target could be and when all of this could be over.
Israel keeps saying that their war is not with the Iranian people, instead calling on the people to rise up against the regime. Given those communications problems you referenced, do we know how Iranians feel about this situation, their predicament?
Well, Iran's foreign minister has just reiterated that Iran is not ready for talks while the Israeli attacks are continuing. But the Israel's prime minister has made it clear that if negotiations should take place, then the only acceptable deal to him and also US President Donald Trump would basically be for Iran to blow up its own nuclear facilities under US supervision in accordance with what they call the Libyan model. And I can hardly imagine the Islamic Republic doing just that, like striking a deal with both of its arch enemies, which, by the way, are both nuclear powers. And after all, I mean, the nuclear program of the Islamic Republic is also a symbol of sovereignty, of technological progress and strategic leverage. But on the other hand, we're seeing that the Islamic Republic has little to no means to counter Israel's attacks at the moment. So the missile rate has significantly dropped already. And at the same time, they're not even able to protect their own nuclear and military sites, let alone their citizens or people. But that being said, if it ends up being the only chance the Islamic Republic has to survive, they might change their mind, because its own survival has always been the most important goal of the Islamic Republic.
European leaders are due to meet in Geneva with Iran's foreign minister today. Does that meeting provide a realistic pathway to de-escalation?
Well, when it comes to negotiation, I think the Europeans can take part, and of course they can encourage both sides to start negotiating again. But in this case, all it comes down is basically to what the Americans are saying, because that's basically the key partner of a deal that the Iranians are looking for. The Europeans, of course, they do not want this conflict to escalate even further. But without Donald Trump or, of course, the Israelis being part of a deal, any deal would not work at all for the Islamic Republic, of course.
Theresa, we'll leave it there. DW's Iran expert Theresa Troper, thanks so much. Well, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi is on his way to Geneva to meet his counterparts from Germany, France, the UK and other European nations. The Europeans' aim is to see whether they can find a diplomatic road to a nuclear deal with Iran. But he said earlier today that Iran was not prepared to speak to anyone as long as Israeli attacks continue. Ahead of the talks, the German foreign minister urged Tehran to show it was more serious about giving up its nuclear program. DW correspondent Jack Parrick is in Brussels and has more on this. Jack, good to see you. The British Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, says he sees a window to achieve a diplomatic solution in the next 2 weeks. How optimistic is he being?
I think it's certainly optimistic when you see the situation with the bombs going on both sides between Israel and Iran. But what they see, the Europeans, and that's what David Lammy has expressed, is that Donald Trump's decision to say that he will only get involved within 2 weeks, they see that as a window for diplomacy, which is what the Europeans have continued to try to do, bearing in mind they were very disappointed when Donald Trump pulled out of the former Iran nuclear deal, which was actually signed in 2013 in Geneva, the city where they're going to be meeting with the Iranian foreign minister. Now, we know that the Iranian foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, is actually going to be in Geneva, but he says that he's not willing to talk until Israel stops dropping bombs on Iran. Now, will the Europeans be able to get him to have a serious conversation today? Will they be able to have a discussion about Iran's nuclear program? We just don't know. But the Europeans will be pleased that at least it seems that he's going to show up and that they will actually get in a room with him.
Right, so they want this serious conversation. What negotiating tactics are European leaders planning to use? What leverage do they have in this conversation, Jack?
Yeah, I mean, the Europeans have been frustrated for a long time about their lack of power in these discussions, and that essentially all that needed for the previous Iran nuclear deal to fall apart was the Americans to walk away from it. Now, they are fully aware that what the Iranians want is the Israelis to stop bombing them. And that in order to do that, the Europeans would have to ramp up pressure on the Israelis. There is some frustration amongst Western partners, specifically with what Israel's been doing in Gaza and now in Iran. Will they try and add pressure and leverage on the Israeli government? Is that something that they can do in this situation? The Europeans will have to wait and see. For Iran, they can offer them some sort of economic support, also public diplomatic support. The Iranians want European criticism of Israel. Now, the Americans and Donald Trump specifically put out a social media post saying unconditional surrender and was calling for Iran to abandon all of its nuclear program. The Europeans are aware that that's really going to be difficult to get the Iranians on board with in this instance while the bombs are still falling on both sides. It's extremely complex. And there is another important aspect to this that we don't talk about very often, and that's the Russian aspect. The Russians have said that if Ayatollah Ali Khamenei were to be killed as part of these airstrikes, that would be very problematic for them. And there could be then a separate sort of Russian angle, and then in the context of the war in Ukraine, it gets ever more complex and complicated. As I say, the importance for the Europeans and what they'll be pleased with is that at least the Iranian foreign minister appears to be showing up for these talks in Geneva.
DW correspondent Jack Parrick, thanks.